Welcome everybody to the Archaeological Research Facilities Bag Lunch for Wednesday, the 13th of October. And a lovely autumn to all of you. I wanted to start before I introduce our wonderful speaker today. I want to give a land acknowledgement for here where we are on Berkeley land. We are the Archaeological Research Facility from where I'm speaking is located in the Wichin, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. We acknowledge that this land remains of great importance to the Ohlone people and that the ARF community inherits a history of archaeological scholarship that has disturbed Ohlone ancestors and erased living Ohlone people from the present and future of this land. It is therefore our collective responsibility to critically transform our archaeological inheritance in the support of Ohlone sovereignty and to hold the University of California accountable to the needs of all American Native and Indigenous peoples. And we are grateful to be here on this lovely land today. But I would like to now turn to our guest speaker today, Dr. Seetha Reddy, who is a wonderful colleague of mine, and I'm just so grateful for her coming to speak with us today. She received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin while lecturing at the University of San Diego, UC San Diego. She began working in cultural resource management as a paleoethnobotanist, which she got her training in her dissertation fieldwork. And she's continued as an archaeologist and as a specialist in archaeobotany throughout her career as a principal investigator and project manager in many venues throughout California, including a major project in the Bologna Marsh of LA County. She is currently president of Reddy Anthropology Consulting, Incorporated, a micro business that offers consulting services for ethnography, archaeology, and paleoethnobotany, where she brings over 30 years of experience in anthropology in 2 countries, the United States and India. Did I say Canada? Of course not. Her anthropological interests include research of subsistence systems, settlement patterns, human behavior, environmental management, Spanish colonialism in California, racial equality, and tribal engagement. Her archaeological work has included early urbanism in South Asia, research in hunters and gatherers and colonialism in California. As a paleoethnobotanist, she has worked on materials from South India, Northwest India, Jordan, and throughout California, North and South. She has been doing ethnographic research since 1988, first in India and then in California, so well steeped in that tradition. In India, Dr. Reddy has worked with traditional farming communities, migratory pastoral populations, and hunter-gatherer populations on land use, settlement, and subsistence-related issues. Her ethnographic research in California has included conducting interviews with Native American tribes and individuals and reporting findings related to traditional cultural land use and ethnographic significance of archaeological sites. Of course, including all the regulations of California and federal requirements. She has regularly published in journals and edited volumes, like I'm just going to mention 3 very briefly. 1, Feeding Family and Ancestors, Persistence of Traditional Native American Lifeways During the Mission Period in Coastal Southern California. That's from the Journal of American Archaeology. Another article is from the Journal of California Great Basin Archaeology called Plant Use by Complex Hunter-Gatherers, Paleoethnobotanical Studies in California. And the third one I want to mention is Agrarian Transitions in Iron Age Southern India, Social and Environmental Implications. So she has published a broad range of work. She's a hard-working scholar, and we're so fortunate that she's willing to take some time to share with us some of her key experiences in her in her life's work. But I want to finally, before I pass this over to Dr. Reddy, I want to mention two very important things that she's recently engaged with. And one is she's the founder of Women in California Archaeology Committee, which is part of the Society for California Archaeology, where she has served as the president for 5 years and vice chair for 1. So she's passing the baton to other women, which is a good thing for her to do. She's also the founder of the recently unveiled Coalition Diversity in California Archaeology, focused on providing support, advocacy, and mentorship for unrepresented professionals in California. So those are two really important aspects of her very diverse and deep career that I want to bring to your attention. So now I will let her speak to you today on her talk that is titled Shaping an Anthropological Research Path in Diverse Settings, a Personal Perspective. So thank you very much, Seetha, and I'm clapping for everybody.
Well, thank you, Christine, for that wonderful introduction. And it'll be remiss if I didn't mention that I first met Christine many years ago, I want to say 89 or so, while we were both in the Midwest. And she is one of my earliest mentors. So I do want to mention that. And let me share my screen. Does that come through okay? Okay, cool. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Christine mentioned, I'm going to talk about my journey starting as a graduate student doing archaeology and ethnoarchaeology in South Asia to working as an anthropologist in California within a CRM context, and then more recently in applied anthropology. My goal is to show you that over the years, there are going to be novel opportunities for you to use the training and the skills you have gained and or gaining as an anthropology student. So first, starting off on my foundations, I obtained my bachelor and doctorate degrees in US universities. However, prior to my doctoral fieldwork, I worked in India in all types of archaeology. My research in graduate school was centered in South Asia and on South Asian archaeology. And my doctoral research was on urbanism associated with the Indus Valley civilization as it was manifest in Northwest India. Specifically, I was interested in understanding the subsistence economies centered around pastoralism and agriculture during the early part of the 2nd millennium BC. So toward this, I designed a multidisciplinary research approach that included archaeology, ethnography, ethnoarchaeology, paleoethnobotany, and bone chemistry. And it was aimed to understand the role of particular plants, millet crops specifically, as both human food and or animal fodder. So I used data from archaeological contexts, so that included macrobotanical remains and bone chemistry of domesticated cattle bone, and also ethnoarchaeological data of crop processing. So I worked with an international team of archaeologists from the University of Pennsylvania and also in India. And we excavated 2 archaeological sites in Northwest rural India in the modern state of Gujarat, which is on the slide where my pointer is right in that area. So one site had ephemeral occupation with very minimal architecture, while the second site had considerable architecture as shown in the slide here, in these slides out here. The deposits the occupation were very deep in the site with the substantial architecture. It had distinct rooms, trash pits, hearths, and related human behavior features. And all these contexts were sampled for macrobotanical remains. So the soil samples were processed through flotation to recover the macrobotanical remains. And you can see a very young me in those pictures doing the flotation. And the slide also shows a couple of millet crops, the Panicum miliare and Pennisetum. And my goal was to understand how and why macrobotanical remains entered the archaeological context, and to get insights on whether the crops were being grown by the occupants themselves or obtained through trade and exchange, and also what the crop grain and byproduct themselves were being used for. Were they used for food for humans, or fodder for animals, or a combination? So therefore, it was critical for me to study how crops were processed. And I focused specifically on millet crops, which I mentioned before. And these millet crops are drought-resistant summer crops. And as I said, this shows this two different types of millets, and even though there are many other millets included in this corpus of plants. Now, while I was working at the two sites, I built relationships with the local farmers because it was really important for me to build the relationships ahead of time, and then go back there to work with them in subsequent years. Now, for the Ethno Archaeology, I worked with non-mechanized farmers, and specifically farmers with small land holdings in both Northwest India around the sites where the excavations were done, but also in South India. So my study of modern crop processing, but in a traditional non-mechanized setting, of course, included in interviews, like I've shown you in a couple of slides. And in this slide, I've shown the processing pathways that a millet crop could potentially go through. So my study really included rigorous study to understand, to document, and also sample the processing pathway from all the way to harvest, like here and here in these slides, through threshing, and that's the product after harvest of one type of millet, threshing, winnowing, and sieving. And this is a second type of winnowing that's specific to South Asia and parts of East Asia, and followed by grinding or pounding, depending on what kind of product you want, whether you want just the seeds without the husks on them, or if you want to have a flour. And then the final, of course, is the food itself, on how it's being consumed. And this photograph shows it as a bread, but it also can prepare them as, you know, a gruel kind of like porridge, or like rice, etc. So through the macrobotanical study, you know, of these ethnographic samples that I've collected from each processing stage, I identified the signature of byproducts and products for each of these stages, with the goal that it can be used to identify such events of processing of plants in the archaeological context. And then using the ethno-archaeological data, I developed these crop processing models based on the type of plant, the morphology of the plant involved. And ultimately, this resulted in the use of the archaeological, archaeobotany data and these models to, identify what was happening at the sites themselves in terms of crop use and disposal, and the use of millets, as human food and animal fodder. Now, the design of the study required me to work as a team, but also independently, as this was, later proved to be a great training that served me really well later on and even today. Another important thing that was really a byproduct of this whole experience of doing fieldwork in India was learning how to study my own culture. And that gave me perspective and tools for ethnography in general, and specifically also as I am doing ethnography today. So once I finished my doctoral degree, I was keen on joining the academic world. Who isn't, right? And I pursued a search for a position for 3 years. And during this time, I entered the cultural resource management or CRM world in California. And really my first steps into this world was as a temporary solution for financial reasons, start being self-sufficient a little bit financially. Now, what most people do not know is that the majority of archaeology that's conducted in the US, and definitely so in the state of California, is done under the CRM umbrella. It's driven by compliance. So agencies and companies are having to meet the requirements of the laws and the regulations and address cultural resources, their inventory, their protection and preservation. So although it is compliance driven, I decided to define a role for myself where research was going to be an important part of what I did on a daily basis. So one of the things that I had to come to face with right away is time and culture, right? I was trained in early urbanism in South Asia, doing agriculture, pastoralism, centralized controlled, to California, where it was mainly hunter-gatherer economies with no domesticates, animal or plants, widely ranging adaptations based on where you were within the geotopography of this large state. So there was definitely a learning curve, but I had to pretty much jump into the deep end immediately and kind of learn as I, was experiencing these different projects and studies. So in my goal to kind of make it to what I want it to be, of course, I looked towards two things. It's like paleoethnobotany. What is the status of paleoethnobotany in California? What I realized it was to date at that point, so this was like, in 93, 94, there were very limited studies done, and it was paleoethnobotany as a field was quite in its infancy throughout California. And the standard response I got when I was inquiring about it was, oh, there are no plant remains, there's no preservation. It's so bad that we don't recover anything, but you got a lot of faunal remains. So what I realized is there wasn't anything standardized being done, and also adequate sampling. So the first step was convincing project managers about the potential and strength of macrobotanical data. What kind of questions can we answer, and why it's important to include these data, and why plant data is just as important as faunal remains and lithic studies, etc. And a lot of the discussions also included cost value. How can you make this, competitive? So it really ended up being like, in the beginning, I had to make a lot of choices of, I'm going to do this real cheap for you, so you can, so I can demonstrate to you about, the value of doing it. So then the next thing was experimental archaeology. Coming fresh from, the crop processing ethno archaeology in India, I started looking at, well, why aren't people trying to study shellfish and trying to figure out how they're processed? So one of the most common shellfish in southern coastal sandy beach, California, are Donax golda, or also called bean clam. So I designed and conducted a study on collection and preparation to understand the dietary role of the shellfish, and conducted that in the lovely sandy beaches of San Diego County. And it really ended up being an interesting study that opened up a lot of doors for me, because really it was like, providing these new insights about plants, about, small shellfish and processing it, kind of concepts and ideas that people hadn't really explored in any great detail. I'm going to give you a few examples of my involvement in long-term research, which resulted in peer-reviewed articles, chapters and books, of course, technical reports and professional talks. The first one is research along the San Diego coast. The focus of my work was on subsistence and self-settlements of pre-contact people in this area. And this is from about, let's say, like 8,000 BP to Spanish contact, which is like, 1542 AD. Now, during this time period, with the hunter-gatherer adaptations, the primary food resources were shellfish. There were schooling fish, land mammals, wild plants, including wild grasses, few to rare nut foods. And right from the beginning, starting in '94, I started working closely with Native Americans. And this has been a theme since then, and increasingly so over the years in a collaborative manner. So my research over 10 years or so in San Diego contributed to several new insights. The first was a dominant theme of prior research was that the coast was abandoned around 10,000 BP. Now our research showed just the opposite. Instead, we found evidence of sedentary villages with seasonal camps, short-term limited activity locales, as I defined it. And hand in hand with this, prior to our work, there was an implicit bias about small food packages like small-sized shellfish and small seeds. And our research dispelled these views and instead illustrated how small shellfish and small seeded plant foods were really important along the coast through time. And these insights really were gained through two things: detailed samplings, and intensive samplings, and the recognition of the role of intensification of these food resources. Moving on, another large, long-term, successful CRM-driven project is what Christine mentioned before in the Los Angeles Basin in the Bayona, and it was for a private development called the Playa Vista Development Project, and I was one of the 4 principal investigators and one of the 2 project managers for it. It was a super large project over many years, and this whole area involved 8,000-year occupation, starting about 8,000 years ago, all the way through the American period. Majority of the sites and the occupations dated to the Mission period. And during the Mission period, in the Los Angeles Basin, there existed a village, a domestic habitation context. There was associated feasting, associated mourning ceremonies, and ritual and ceremonialism, and also mortuary context. We encountered and excavated a large cemetery of Native Americans, primarily dating to the Mission period, but also going back all the way to 8,000 years ago. So there was a continuity of occupation, and this area was a persistent place that Native Americans continued to come and live in. So, of course, this project involved working very closely with Native Americans, the Gabrielino tribe of the Los Angeles Basin. And it was it was one of the most exciting projects that I have participated so far. And we got a lot of insights, but a very quick summary of what I felt were the more interesting insights for me was persistence of Native culture despite a colonial context. So Native Americans continued living in their villages and their rancherias during missionization all the way to about 1814 AD. So majority of the foods that they ate were wild animals, including marine, estuarine, terrestrial animals, and plants, including wild grasses and many small seeded plants. And interestingly, contrary to what a lot of historic plant geographers have said, wild plants did not disappear, with the start of the Mission period. Instead, they were being intensively collected by the Native Americans in the Bayona. And introduced colonial foods and also material cultures such as glass beads, like you see on this slide, copper pots and other metal items were selectively being accepted into the ceremonial practices. The research also showed that there was clear distinction in social status based on mortuary analysis. And again, kind of dispelling this view that, there was very little food available for Native Americans in the Mission period. there was feasting related to annual mourning and ceremonialism that continued into and well into the middle part of the mission period till about 1814 AD. So I kind of continuing on with this mission period archaeology, I've been recently been involved in a large scale excavation project at Mission Santa Clara, very close to Berkeley. And again, this project is development related. And in the map right here, this is a map showing the universities right here, Santa Clara University. This map here shows all the red polygons, which are features that are dating to the mission period. These features have been identified through different projects over the years, by different companies working there. Now, this the last project that I've been involved in has identified Native American rancheria, right in this area up here in the northern part. And these are like rancherias are residential spaces where Native people were housed by the missionaries. And they include adobe row houses, right here in the slide here, with huts inside and also shared spaces between the rows. So we encountered some of these adobe buildings, but also interestingly, we seem to have caught the edge of the rancheria. We encountered features related to agriculture. How perfect is that for me? This slide here shows in cross section a feature that was spread over a very large area. And it was a very distinct feature that you see here, which is a crop processing feature. And this is like a close-up of a piece of that. And this is where they were actually threshing and winnowing crops that were being grown. These are like wheat and barley domesticated crops that were brought in by the Spanish, will be grown and processed by the Native Americans. And also here is another close to this crop processing. There's a feature that we feel is an animal corral showing hoof prints also. So we kind of caught the, edge of the rancheria and into the agricultural landscape. A couple of important insights that are emerging from this is the persistence of Native ceremonialism, again, just like in Bayona, but here within private spaces. So between the adobe row houses, the Native Americans kind of were persisting to practice their ceremonial activities away from the prying eyes of the Spanish priests. And then another thing is that the wild plants continue to exist despite, competition with domesticated plants, and animals and introduced weeds specifically. So this is, an example of one of the features between the two row houses of a feature that we feel has to do with annual mourning. Right here in yellow is an artifact that's typically associated with ceremonialism. And this is a photograph of wild seeds, all carbonized, and were being offered in baskets as part of the annual mourning ceremony. Now, throughout, as I mentioned, I was engaged with Native Americans, and this has opened the last decade or so, opened doors conducting ethnography and Native American consultation, but in a compliance context. This involves doing archival research and working with tribes to identify a new set of cultural resources, which are called tribal resources. These are place names, villages, landscapes, like sacred landscapes, gathering landscapes, ceremonial landscapes, and also talking about natural resources like plants and also, different kinds of elements as cultural resources. And all of this to help identify these tribal resources, figure out ways to help in their protection and preservation, So this work, as I continued working with Native American communities kind of led to a couple of projects that I kind of fell in my lap in the last 2 years that really are kind of taking me into what I feel is applied anthropology. And these are, first one is what is called Caltrans project. It's a California Transportation Department. It's a state planning department that I'm working with, where they really want to understand the tribal planning needs for the 109 federally recognized tribes. So I'm working with the tribes, it's kind of like ethnography, but not about cultural issues, but it's about, the capabilities and capacities of tribes as it pertains to them planning, transportation within their tribal lands. And the end results will provide data for Caltrans to responsibly engage with the tribe and provide, the assistance they need. The second project that I'm immensely enjoying right now has to do with working with the California Housing and Community Development and working for COVID relief and emergency relief, where I am helping the HCD staff to evaluate projects that help tribes for economic development, housing, meals, emergency housing, homelessness shelters, etc. And also to provide training for these folks at HCD on best practices on how to engage with tribes, how to engage with different cultures, that's non-Euro-American. A big part of it is assessing homelessness among California tribes, for funding. So helping the HCD folks understand tribal culture and also how to navigate through intertribal equity. So it would be like understanding cultural behaviors, what does homelessness actually mean in different cultural spheres? What does overcrowding in homes mean in different cultural contexts? So these are some of the ongoing applied anthropology work. So I do wear different hats, depending on the needs. So right now I'm wearing, for these projects, applied anthropology. I work as an archaeologist, a paleoethnobotanist, ethnographer, depending on what the needs are. So I want to end by a quick few notes on lessons learned for me that I hope will help you, the students. I really work to get as wide an experience as possible, but within reason, of course, and it took time to get the experience. I work really hard also not to label myself, not to tag myself as, to be a specific subdiscipline. So I tried really hard not to pigeonhole myself as being, just an archaeologist, just a pre-contact archaeologist, or just a paleoethnobotanist. So that way, opportunities were wide. And this kind of brought to the next thing, which I think is very important, is being flexible. Being flexible about the types of projects and the types of roles. Everyone wants to be the PI, right? But there's a lot to say about offering your services in support of someone who is the PI. Gets you to work with different people, gets you kind of looking at the human condition in different ways and different angles, and affords more opportunity. And the last thing is, I cannot emphasize the importance of actively seeking mentors, and seeking mentors at all stages of the profession. Even today, I need mentors. I seek mentors, and it's really important that you start early and continue throughout. So towards this, like Christina mentioned, I bring your attention to the Women in California Archaeology, a great place to seek support and mentorship and advocacy. And the recently formed Coalition for Diversity in California Archaeology. The chair for that, we have a great group of leaders in the coalition, and both are on Facebook. So if you guys are interested, please go on Facebook and ask to join it. And the last thing I'm going to end on is that we have upcoming this Friday at 5 p.m. A virtual event that is being put together by CDCA, the Coalition for Diversity in California Archaeology, in honor of the California Archaeology Month, October. So I really hope that you will join. You do have to register. There are 2 topics. I think any one of us can participate in the discussion. Where's California archaeology now and where it should be? Then the second one is education, pathways, and mentoring for archaeological career in CRM, academia, and museum. It is not just for BIPOC people. It's open, regardless of your ethnic background or any background. We welcome everybody. So that's about all I got for now. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with me. Thanks.
And thank you, Seetha. That was wonderful. A wonderful race, really jog through your very complex career and highlighting the many important points that I know people in our community and beyond. Hopefully, this is going to go on YouTube, so people will be looking at this going forward, not just today. So I'm just really grateful for you to come. I want to highlight those who are watching it live. You can add your comments or your questions to the chat in the YouTube session on that. I'm actually on the Zoom session here. And these comments come in, somebody's saying thank you. Kent Lightfoot is saying really great talk. There is a greater acceptance of ethnobotanical research. Oh, here's a question. Sorry, I'm reading it wrong. Kent Lightfoot asks, is there a greater acceptance of ethnobotanical research in California CRM today? And I would imagine than when you started.
Great question, Kent, and thank you so much for that. I say yes, definitely. I definitely get asked more about conducting paleoethnobotanical work. It is still not where I personally would like to see it. I really would like to have plants being considered on the same level of intensity as, lithic studies and faunal. But I think publications help. But I've also done, as both Christine and Kent know, sessions at the California meetings. Those really have helped kind of spread the word, etc. So I think definitely compared to 93, 94, I think we are in a definitely much better place.
Great, that's good to know. We're all supportive. I'm going to ask a few questions if I might.
Absolutely.
And of course, it's your work is always very rich and informative to me. So I have some specifics and some general ones. I hope that's all right. The first one is my old friend Chenopodium. You talked about wild grasses and you gave us pictures of 2 wonderful California seeds that are really pretty ubiquitous up and down grassland areas. And in our work in South America of Chenopodium, watching an indigenous taxon ultimately become a domesticate. In fact, several domesticates. It's besides tracking the size of the seed and the seed test and the usual sort of archaeobotanical ingredients, I was wondering if your grasses show other aspects, not necessarily the traditional ones, but shift in processing, intensification evidence. I know you haven't. I mean, there's always more work to be done, but from what you know in California, is there evidence, can you see evidence of shifting levels of intensification of use in these wild grasses?
Thanks, Christine. Yes, actually, that's a great question, because the work I did in the Bayona kind of gave me the types of sample sizes I needed to talk about, intensification or targeted exploitation. And of course, I did do the standard, increase changes in seed size, etc., like Charlie Michek had done also for the same grasses, and did see a change over time. It wasn't just like an exponential growth, it was, up and down, and that's expected in general. What I ended up really feeling about what was happening in the Bayona was that they were intensively collecting these grasses, because what was happening is they were dominating enormously over any other small seeds, like, yeah, there was Chenopodium, they were like tar weeds, etc. There were other ones, but really when you're talking about, not only were they ubiquitous, but they occurred in like significantly higher, percentages. And any kind of rachis remains, etc., were only of these two grasses, not others. So those were all like indications that there was intensive cultivation. Now, there's debate about whether there was, domestication or agriculture, but at this point, I don't feel comfortable going there, but it's more, they were targeted cultivations,
So like cultivars, and in fact, that's always the problem. Do you have to, the tradition in archaeobotany, for those who aren't archaeobotanists, is we look for morphological changes. But the point is there's other data like what you're describing with real evidence of focused, intensive production or collection and processing. So that leads me to my next question, if I might, and that's about processing. You showed a lot of wonderful pictures of processing and the stages of processing in your millet or early ethnographic, ethno-archaeological millet work. And I'm wondering how that has informed and helped you try and get a sense on these same very grasses, because they're all grasses, they're all Poaceae, how the processing knowledge you had has able to inform your engagement with these wild grasses, meaning you're going to find grinding stones and processing evidence, and sort of, can you just say something about how that's influenced your ability to see these taxa in California?
Absolutely. So in California, pre-contact and, native context itself, a lot of the processing of these seeds and nuts is through groundstone, whether it's bedrock milling or the milling stone itself, the portable. I say portable because I wouldn't be able to move those around, but my work in South Asia on understanding, what types of processing is needed to come to the ultimate product really helped a lot in understanding this, in terms of what is needed to process, wild barley, what is needed to process Chenopodium. So therefore, where would you find those kinds of byproducts? What would you see in the site, where, at the site within the site's deposits versus elsewhere? And most importantly, it really got me a better perspective into like processing of acorn. Because understanding the location of where the processing occurs and the type of processing is going to increase the representation in archaeological records, right? Simple archaeobotany, you need, carbonization of some point to enter into the archaeological record. If you don't have any kind of processing that involves, fire or, some kind of carbonization, you're not going to find much of it, right? So in a context like acorn processing, and I have to admit, I did like one of my processing diagrams for wild grasses and acorn processing, is much of it occurs off-site, and there are very few acorns that you can eat without, leaching, right? So whether, so the processing is really important, and it happens off-site, away from hearts or any kind of roasting activities. So that really kind of contributed a lot, and kind of made it easier for me, at least as whereas plant foods go, to kind of step into California archaeology, compared to some of the other, data sets.
And to fill in the gaps where people might just not even see it. That's great. Thank you. I have to say, there's a couple of things I have to read to you now. Okay. Because this is how we're doing it on Zoom. First, William White, one of my colleagues, writes great talk, Seetha. I know he's actually in the field or doing research away, so he's participating, which is wonderful. And the next one is from Jordan Brown. And he says, thanks for a great talk. Have you also worked with federally unrecognized tribes in California? If so, does this change your approach to the work in particular ways?
Actually, that's I love that question because I work both with tribes that have federal recognition and those that don't. And just putting it out there, it has made me much more sensitive and aware of challenges that tribes without federal recognition face in terms of I'm not even talking about just the culture and the archaeology, working in the transportation world and the applied anthropology. I've been trying to educate HCD on why it's important to kind of open up funding to, tribes that don't have the infrastructure, like a lot of, not all federally recognized tribes have, but more of them have, tribal capabilities. So definitely, I think it has affected me, changed me, in thinking about tribes very differently, based of course on culture, that's obvious, but also in terms of their recognition and what that means to them personally, of course, in terms of just historic trauma, etc., but also in terms of what services they have, etc. And one thing that's great about California CEQA law is it doesn't differentiate them. Like when it comes to CEQA consultation, it includes everybody, federally recognized, without recognition, individuals, etc. So that's wonderful. But if it's like, federal projects, we're working on Navy, for example, I'm working on a couple of projects where the ethnography or the consultation is, mainly federally recognized. I may not agree with it, but that's the way it is.
Thank you. So you're making a case that at least in California, there's some ability to help unfederally unrecognized tribes, which is a great thing to point out. So I'm afraid our time is up. So I just there's one more thank you from Matt Sayer, who is a colleague, former student watching, an archaeobotanist. So I want to thank you very much again, Dr. Reddy, Seetha Reddy, for coming to us through Zoom, so making it easier than normal, and giving us a really rich history of your research and how you're so productive and so three-dimensional in your scholarship because of your sensitive and rich research that you've been doing in important places. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And if people want to reach out to me about anything I've spoken about today, please, you can get my email from Christine too. Thank you.